Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's great to see some of our students and alumni and members of our professional chapter logging on. Great to have everyone here with us. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Molly Tobin. I am the Interim Executive Director here at the Alexander Hamilton Society. For those who might be joining us for the first time, welcome. The Alexander Hamilton Society is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit national organization that seeks to identify, educate, and launch young men and women into the foreign policy and national security landscape, imbued with the Hamiltonian perspective of strong and principled American leadership in global affairs. We operate on college campuses across the country. We now have nearly 2,500 alumni, many of whom are working in the foreign policy and national security space. If you're interested in learning more about what we do and how to get involved, please visit our website, alexanderhamiltonsociety.org, and we'd love to connect with you. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome, as part of our America's Role in the World book series, Peter Berkowitz. Peter is the Todd Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He has had an extensive career in academia, policy, and public service. From 2019 to 2021, he directed the State Department's policy planning staff, served as Executive Secretary of the Commission on Unalienable Rights, and advised the Secretary of State. A recipient of the Bradley Prize and a member of the American Academy of Science and Letters, he also writes as a columnist for RealClearPolitics and directs studies for our friends over at the Public Interest Fellowship. He's also the author of or editor of numerous books on constitutionalism, conservatism, liberalism, and political philosophy, and has written widely in major journals and newspapers. Peter, thank you so much for being here with us and joining us, and I look forward to our conversation. Everyone can see the beautiful cover explaining Israel. First and foremost, congratulations on the book. It's really a great exploration, and you compile really great pieces on, I think, Israel's moral and political foundations and of how the world understands or often misunderstands the Jewish state. I would be remiss, I think, if we didn't just start off by acknowledging the events of the past few days, weeks, even months. But obviously, just the last week, the events have been deeply consequential, I think, for Israel, for the region, and more so for the global conversation about the country's sort of moral and strategic standing. So before we even turn to the book, can you just sort of share how you're thinking about the developments of the last week, how they shape or test the arguments that you make in the book?
Yes, but before I do that, I want to thank you for hosting this conversation, for the opportunity to discuss with you and the students these important issues. Yes, we've been witnessing monumental events, really extraordinary events in Israel for several years now. We focus on this week. Even focusing on this week, we have to go back to the September 29th joint news conference with President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. At that news conference, President Trump announced his 2021, 22 point, let's call it multi-point peace plan, to which not only had Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed, this is a diplomatic achievement, but also 8 Arab and Muslim states, including Turkey, Qatar, Pakistan, and Indonesia. Extraordinary. Nevertheless, some veteran commentators argued that Netanyahu had been forced by Netanyahu to accept, contrary to his will, Trump's plan. People like White House correspondent David Sanger at the New York Times and veteran Middle East peace negotiator Dennis Ross. But when I read the Trump peace plan, I actually see a Hamas surrender document, and I see Benjamin Netanyahu getting just about everything he wanted. What do I mean by that? The peace plan calls for, among other things, a ceasefire, a return of all the hostages, living and deceased. Very importantly, because these were Netanyahu's war aims, the disarming of Hamas, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, the de-radicalization of the population. Hamas will not serve in government. The government will be composed of Palestinian technocrats with no connection, or as little connection as possible, to the PA. an international stabilization force will be inserted, but Israel will retain, unspecified for how long, overall security responsibility for Gaza. Now, I also happen to think, and this is contrary to what President Trump said in Jerusalem on Monday, where he declared this long and difficult war has ended. This is an overstatement because Hamas has not ended the war against Israel. But from Netanyahu's point of view, I think one of two things happens. Either the plan is implemented as drafted, he achieves his war aims, or, not unlikely, Hamas refuses to comply. They already they announced just a few minutes ago that they have returned 9 of 29 bodies of deceased hostages, and that's all they have. That's a violation. I think Netanyahu's view is that if they fail to comply, these are only the earliest stages, the Israeli Defense Forces are in excellent position to continue to pursue his war aims, which are, again, the disarming of Hezbollah, the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip, and the de-radicalization of the population. I'll just add this because I've only now got into to this week. As you know, it was rejoicing throughout the land in Israel. Returning of the hostages had become a top priority for, say, a substantial majority of Israelis. The Trump administration gets substantial credit for its unorthodox diplomacy. The Israel Defense Forces get substantial credit for their bravery and extraordinary achievements over the course of the last year and a half. But because Hamas continues to wage war against Israel, we should not expect Israel to be living in peace and harmony with the Gazan population anytime soon.
So, Peter, let's zoom out for a minute and then we'll get some more into some of the nitty-gritty. So I sort of want to zoom out, but on a personal note, which is what moved you to put the book together? I mean, was there a moment in your scholarship, in your public service, where you sort of had this moment of feeling, that the prevailing debates about Israel were missing something essential, something you felt you wanted to clarify to reclaim?
Well, this is a bit of a long story, but I will try to keep it within decent boundaries. About actually a generation ago, I was given an invitation to create a speaker series in Israel. I leapt at this opportunity. Managing that speaker series gave me the opportunity to travel frequently to Israel, 4 times a year or so, hosting speakers. And as I hosted them, I also got to meet a wider range of Israelis, but especially in the national security community. This was in the wake of the September 11th attacks. My interest turned increasingly to foreign affairs in the Middle East. And within a short time of the commencement of these travels, I decided that I had already known that the complexities of Israel are poorly understood in the United States. I realized that I had a special opportunity because I traveled so much to Israel, and not just to host a series, but also to teach. I decided that I would use my visits to Israel, as they say, le'assof deot, to collect opinions. And I began writing regularly while I was in Israel. First and eventually as a columnist for RealClearPolitics. And as Israel was suffering in 2023 and 2024 for 2 crises, the crises over constitutional reform and the crisis of the October 7th massacres and defending itself against Iran's Ring of Fire, I realized that the columns that I had written for about a decade actually formed a kind of history, a history of Israel at a peak of confidence in the mid-2010s, to Israel entangled in harsh struggles internally and with its external enemies. And it occurred to me that the essays that I had put together could provide to people who care about Israel and face an increasingly hostile world which doesn't understand Israel, doesn't want to understand Israel, wants to denounce Israel. It occurred to me that this collection of essays might help others explain Israel to themselves and to others.
Well, and the title itself is sort of it reflects both an analytical and sort of a moral project, and so it was a fascinating read. So, Peter, in one of the pieces, you write that understanding Israel requires grappling with sort of three interwoven ideas. You have Jewish nationalism, a liberal democracy, and moral realism. Can you unpack for everybody how those strands come together and where sometimes they might pull apart?
Yes, so in a way we can go back to Israel's great founding moment. In May 1948, a half year after the United Nations recognized the right of the Jewish people to create a state in the land of Israel, side by side with an Arab state, accepted by the Jews living in the land of Israel, rejected by not only the Arabs living there, but all the surrounding Arabs. So in May 1948, with 5 Arab armies preparing to destroy the Jews living in the land of Israel, David Ben-Gurion in Tel Aviv, along with dozens of others, declared the creation of the State of Israel. This Declaration of Independence, I think, is highly instructive. What do we learn about this new country from the Declaration of Independence? That it's got at least 3 crucial elements that need to be woven together. In the first place, it's a Jewish state. It's the nation state of the Jewish people. Okay, what does that mean? Well, we can write many books about this and have long conversations late into the night, but it's the beginning of the conversations, the nation state of the Jewish people. Second, it's a nation that protects freedom. Israel's Declaration of Independence is very clear about that it promises, it assures equality of rights for all, including the Arab citizens of Israel, and it will protect basic rights and fundamental freedoms. And it will also be democratic in the sense it doesn't mention the declaration doesn't mention the word democracy, but it recognizes full citizenship for everybody, Jews and non-Jews, even as it's a nation state of the Jewish people. And by the way, like the United States, Israel is brought into existence amid war. As we were in 1776, so was Israel brought into 1948. The people who declared the birth of the State of Israel were engaged in fighting a war. Ben-Gurion was effectively the head of the army as well. They knew that they were living in a hostile and dangerous neighborhood. So they combined a commitment to high principle with a commitment to acting on what we might call as the most fundamental of rights, the right to preserve yourself, the right to defend yourself. So from my point of view, all the complexities of the Israel challenge are boldly articulated right there in Israel's founding document.
Now, Peter, many critics frame Israel as an anomaly, sort of a state that's either defined by conflict or religion rather than actual universal democratic principles. But your writing really argues that Israel embodies the modern democratic experiment in a particularly vivid way. So how do you reconcile these competing narratives?
Well, a crude way would begin by saying the criticism is nonsense, but I will not say that. I will instead explain why one might conclude the criticism is nonsense. What European nation state does not combine a commitment to a national ethos, meaning bound up with the history of a particular people, the language of a particular people, sometimes the religion of a particular people, right? We still, the UK still has a Church of England. I do not know of a European nation which does not aspire, in practice, combine a commitment to national identity with a commitment to protecting individual rights and running in democratic fashion. Now, there is a country that more than most any was created and dedicated to a proposition. That's the language of Abraham Lincoln, and that's the United States. But I said more than almost any. I didn't say exclusively. This may be a bit of a tangent, but worth emphasizing in response to your question. The American Revolution was, in a sense, a conservative revolution, by which I mean those who led it, those who fought in it, aimed to do what? Conserve what they inherited from Britain, meaning conserve a language, conserve a sensibility, conserve customs, conserve a common law, conserve a set of political institutions. Their argument against the king is that he was violating their rights as Englishmen. They wanted to conserve those. So even in the United States, we find, combined with a commitment to individual rights and democratic self-government, a sense that we are a distinctive nation. Now, I think it would be fair to say that Israel faces the challenges that the United States and European faces even more so. But they are not anomalous challenges. They are challenges characteristic of Western-style liberal democracies.
Now, I'll point out that the title of the book is Explaining Israel, but then it also says the Jewish state, the Middle East, and America. And so we'll dig more into talking about, I think, the relationship between Israel and the United States and what one can learn from the other. But I want to ask you to weigh in on a word that I think in the last 2 years has become a word talked about in a way that it was not in the mainstream media in the same way before, which is the word Zionism. It has become a buzzword. And you trace sort of Israel's roots not only to Jewish history, but to the broader Western political tradition from sort of the Bible to the Enlightenment. How does Zionism fit within that lineage? I mean, do you see it as a continuation of the liberal project, a correction to it, something distinct altogether? And what's sort of your read on Zionism being used, in the way that it has as sort of this buzzword and attack method of the last 2 years in sort of the discourse that we've seen?
Okay, Molly, again, you ask a big and
It's a big one.
a very important question, and I'll do my best in a reasonable amount of time to
Take your
take
time.
on this. It's an excellent challenge. So I think a good way to think about Zionism is as both a continuation of and a correction for the Jews of the modern, we could call it of the modern tradition of freedom. What do I mean by that? And I should say that I'm now going to focus on the dominant strand of modern Zionism, labor Zionism, the Zionism of Herzl, the Zionism that Ben-Gurion inherited, the Zionism that gains power over young people in the late 19th century Eastern Europe, in the beginning of the 20th century in some parts of Western Europe. This Zionism was in part, certainly for Herzl, a response to the failures of modern rights-protecting democracy. Modern rights-protecting democracies in the late 19th century and early 20th century were not succeeding in incorporating Jews as full citizens. You recall that was the Dreyfus affair that awakened Herzl. What did modern Zionism want? Modern Zionism was not in the first place a religious movement. One can argue that there was in the background a religious inspiration, true. But as it was understood by many of its founders, certainly Herzl, was not in the first place religious. It was in the first place political. We could call this not labor Zionism. I shouldn't have used that word, political Zionism. The purpose was to create a nation state for the Jewish people in which they could flourish as Jews, but also with their rights protected and govern themselves democratically, as the French could in France, and the English could in England, and the Germans could in Germany. Obviously, things did not work out perfectly. Obviously, well, what I'm trying to say is actually, from the point of view of political Zionism, the descent of Germany into barbarism was was an extension of the problem that originally gave rise to Zionist enthusiasm, at least among a small segment of young people in Germany. The sense that Weimar is not working out. Nobody dreamed during Weimar that it would turn into the greatest mass murder of all time, the Holocaust. So Zionism arises as a result of failures, modern liberal democracy, but it's meant to provide for Jews the benefits of a rights-protecting democracy. And as you suggest, yes, Zionism has been turned by the enemy of the Jews into a term of opprobrium, and this relates to your earlier question, to suggest that Zionism represents some kind of anomalous political movement among the civilized nations of the world. To the contrary, Zionism is quite consistent with some of the most distinctive and basic trends within the modern West.
So one of the things I think we hear a lot about, Peter, is sort of moral legitimacy. And you devote considerable attention to this question, especially when it comes to the ethics of self-defense. And I think that's something that we've seen, to such a degree since, October 7th of 23. How should we, I guess, think about the just war tradition in the context of Israel's very unique security dilemmas? And has your position on how we think about it changed since October 7th?
Interesting. Yes, I began thinking about the laws of war after in the United States, in the American context, after the September 11th attacks. All sorts of difficult questions were raised for the United States military in fighting against Islamists, jihadists. And then I wrote a short book on this, Israel and the struggle over the international laws of war. Israel was vilified after the winter 2008-2009 operation in Gaza, Ofer Yitzhak, Cast Lead. In fact, the United Nations commissioned and got Justice Richard Goldstone to preside over a 500-page report denouncing Israel, finding that Israel had consistently, systematically, in its 3-week operation in Gaza, violated the international laws of war, committing crimes, war crimes and crimes against humanity. I studied that report, and I came to the conclusion that the authors, the drafters, did not know what they were talking about. Now, other critics of the report came to a different conclusion. They came to the conclusion that, well, if this is international law, Israel should emancipate itself from it, because Israel won't be able to defend itself under the international laws of war. I think that is the wrong conclusion. I believe that Israel can defend itself under the international laws of war. And moreover, the fact is that IDF soldiers are educated on the international laws of war. American soldiers are educated on the international laws of war. It is true that a commitment to these laws of war is one of the distinguishing characteristics of the Israeli army and the American army. And it's also true. This imposes some limitations, but I do believe Israel is capable of defending itself under the laws of war, and so is the United States. Here's the way I would think about it. If you don't mind, on this issue, I am fond of recalling the challenge to which Hillel was once put by a presumptuous skeptic who said, "Can you teach all of the Torah standing on one foot?" To which Hillel replied, "Yes. Do not do that to others, which you would not have done to you. All the rest is interpretation. Go study." What is the connection to the international laws of war? I'm not going to stand on one foot, but I can summarize the international laws of war, which fill volumes, as the Talmud does, standing on one foot. A nation state has the obligation to balance military necessity with humanitarian responsibility. The problem with Israel's critics is they focus exclusively on humanitarian responsibility, and they typically know very little about military necessity. The international laws of war authorize nation states to defend themselves and take the steps necessary to remove threats to their territorial integrity and political sovereignty. In the first place, it's true that the response needs to be proportional, but by proportional does not mean you can only kill as many people on the other side as have died on your side. It means you mustn't cause any more physical destruction, and you must not kill any more people than are necessary to accomplish a legitimate military objective. So I believe with that understanding, balancing military necessity and humanitarian responsibility, Israel is authorized to do what's necessary, in this case, to destroy Hamas as a fighting force, to dismantle Hamas so that it can never again rule in Gaza, and to return the hostages.
So, one of the things I think since October 7th that was very difficult from the Israeli side to portray to the public was I don't think the public grasped just how many fronts of this war they were fighting. And I think that's something that got lost in a lot of this. And it really, to your points about morality, I mean, really, Israel was and it continues to be tried in the court of public opinion. And so I think with October 7th and the ongoing regional turbulence, I mean, moral judgment about Israel's actions have become even more polarized in the last 2 years than they were previously. How do you hope that the book really helps readers navigate those debates with actual intellectual honesty rather than ideology?
Here we go again. A big and important question. Let's start here. A small aspect of the book. I tried, I'm not sure I fully succeeded, but I tried when doing the final editing of the book to ensure that every time in a chapter, each chapter is a column from over the last 10 years. Every time I'm, for the first time in a column, mention Hamas, I refer to the jihadists as Iran-backed Hamas. Every time I first mention Hezbollah, I try to refer to Hezbollah as Iran-backed Hezbollah. Every time I mention Syria, Iran-backed Syria. Every time I mention the Houthis, Iran-backed Houthis. Why? Because there is a temptation still to think of Israel as having been engaged in, let's call it the Israel-Hamas war. I also tried to, sometimes more heavy-handedly, sometimes less heavy-handedly, to insist that no, Israel is engaged, and even before October 7th was engaged, in a 7-front war that Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is waging against the Jewish state. Those fronts include, you could say more than 7, but they certainly include Gaza, Judea and Samaria, where Hamas actually has quite a stronghold, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian proxies in Iraq. We've already mentioned the Houthis in Syria. And of course, the head of the snake, or the head of the octopus, if you prefer that metaphor, Tehran itself. So one way I try to explain the matter is by insisting on the reality that Gaza is but one front in this the massive war. And so an implication today is that even if the Trump peace plan is implemented as written, the other fronts actually have not been defeated, dismantled, destroyed. Prime Minister Netanyahu actually gave a speech today in which he himself said, Israel faces many challenges ahead. Yes, the IDF dealt Hezbollah a devastating blow. Yes, Operation Rising Like a Lion from June will go down in the annals of military history. The ways in which the Israelis managed to decapitate top military commanders, top scientists, inflict very serious blows on the nuclear program, destroy large stocks of ballistic missiles, and Iran's ability to produce them. But none of these enemies has agreed to unconditional surrender. Israel is not where the United States was in 1945 with the Germans and with the Japanese. Remember, at the end of World War II, the United States did not negotiate with Germany, Nazi Germany. The United States did not negotiate with Imperial Japan. The United States dictated terms, occupied these two countries, told the Germans and the Japanese what would happen, and the Germans and the Japanese signed on the dotted line. This is not what just happened this week. Joyous and as great achievement as Monday was, Israel and the United States did not dictate terms. We negotiated with the jihadists.
So I want to pick up on that. Let me just invite everybody to, as questions pop up, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will, in short time, start getting those over to Peter to answer. Peter, one of the, whether we refer to it as the president's 20 or 21 or 22-point plan, his multi-point plan.
Yes.
I think one of the misconceptions this week is that people look at this as a comprehensive one-time peace deal. And there's a lot of people, especially some Israeli reporters, who are reading it as really the first point of it was a hostage release deal, which almost was separate from the remaining points because they don't see a possibility of Hamas actually agreeing to some of the bullets in the Trump plan there. What is your take on all of this? I mean, obviously, the first point is the hostage release deal. As to this point, Hamas hasn't even met their mark on that. They haven't released all of the deceased hostages as they were supposed to. Do we get to point 2 through 20?
So there is confusion. Some of the confusion is legitimate because the president has spoken ambiguously about this. What do I mean? The president gave the impression on September 29th, with Prime Minister Netanyahu standing by his side in the White House, that this was a take it or leave it offer. But when on October 3rd, Hamas said, we're willing to discuss, by the way, this is very important language Hamas used, your efforts to end the war on Gaza. Hamas says nothing about ending their war on Israel. And of course, Israel is not conducting a war on Gaza. Israel is conducting a war against Hamas. But Hamas language is very revealing. In any case, when Hamas issued its response, the president embraced the opportunity to negotiate just the first 1 or 2 points. originally, you're right, there was no such thing as phase one or phase two. The word phases are not in this plan. Obviously, there's a kind of chronological order. You can't insert an international stabilization force unless there's a ceasefire and return of the hostages. But there was no initial sense. And the peace plan as written is clearly meant to be taken as a whole, as you suggest. All that said, it is reasonable to suppose that Hamas is not going to fulfill its side of the obligations that are laid out there. And by the way, this is quite reasonable. Who in his or her right mind would trust the people who orchestrated the massacre of October 7th? Not just the massacre, the torture, the humiliation, the rape, the taking of 251 mostly civilian hostages, holding them, the last of them, for 2 years in outrageous conditions. Who would trust them at their word? As I said earlier, though, I think actually from Prime Minister Netanyahu's point of view, it's a win-win situation, a win-win in a very problematic situation, meaning if we skeptics are wrong, and Hamas with the coercive force of the United States and the 8 Arab and Muslim countries and Israel, if Hamas actually complies, Prime Minister Netanyahu and Israel get what they could reasonably hope for: the disarming, the demilitarization, de-radicalization in Gaza. And if Hamas doesn't comply, Israel is actually in a better position. The hostages have been returned. And by the way, another consideration that people should keep in mind, when we talk about Israel withdrawing troops from its security positions before the ceasefire, what are we talking about? Where Gaza City is located in the Gaza Strip, Gaza is between 4 and 5 miles wide. In other words, Tzahal, the Israeli Defense Forces, are moving a few kilometers back. If Hamas brazenly violates the agreement or opts out, or it becomes clear it's not going to proceed with negotiations, Israeli tanks have a few kilometers to drive to return to the positions. And it seemed clear, I thought, from Prime Minister Netanyahu's remarks today in Israel, that he is ensuring that Israel is prepared for that eventuality. We hope it doesn't come to this, but he's prepared.
So, Peter, in your conclusion of the book, you really suggest that understanding Israel can also help us understand the modern moral condition, that Israel isn't just a case study, but it's a lens. What do you mean by that?
Well, in the last chapter of the book, the last column, I draw on a short book that was published by Ari Shavit last year. In it, he emphasizes that Israel is engaged in an existential war, not in the sense of 20th century philosophy, but that the threats that it was facing, the threats of that have been created by the Islamic Republic of Iran, nuclear weapons, the ballistic missile threat, and the ring of fire around Israel. This called on Israel to exhibit two sets of virtues that do not commonly coexist in an individual human being or a nation state: the virtues of Athens and the virtues of Sparta. What did Shavit mean by that? Well, the virtues of Athens, the distinctive virtues of Athens, are the cultivation of philosophical virtues, the humane virtues, the democratic virtues, although the Athenians knew how to fight. Sparta its rival Sparta was a kind of military camp. The young people learned discipline. They learned to be stolid. They learned to make sacrifices for the nation. They learned to live in austere conditions. They had nothing of the luxury of Athens. Shavit's point is that, well, we can say, all of us, we have a tendency to forget it, live in a dangerous world. Israel, more so than almost any nation. So in that sense, Israel, we're like Israel, except Israel's more so. Shavit's point is that Israel especially has to cultivate the virtues of Athens, the refined virtues, the democratic virtues, and the virtues of the warrior. I think in the United States, we must do the same thing, although we have a tendency, for obvious reasons, to experience with less urgency the reason that we must too, of course, in the right balance, consistent with our rights-protecting democracy and our traditions, but we too have to recognize that for us, the choice is not between Athens and Sparta, but how do we, consistent with our fundamental principles and our constitutional traditions, and in the face of the challenges that the Alexander Hamilton Society specializes in studying and bringing into focus, how do we combine these sets of moral virtues?
So let me ask you one more question, and I preface with it'll be a big one, and then I'll
I
ask
know
you
it will be,
and then
yes.
I'll ask you a quick ending one, and we'll open it up to some audience questions before we go. We haven't spent all that much time talking about the United States, particularly the importance of the relationship between the United States and Israel. And so one of the questions I'd love your take on is how have the last 2 years sort of eroded or changed that relationship? I think we sort of start seeing how Israel in our own domestic politics is becoming a political wedge in ways that it hadn't previously. And so that would sort of be just your take on an observation on that and what you make of it. But the other is, I think, you often hear some Israeli representatives saying that in their view, the United States has always been an invaluable ally to Israel, but in the 21st century, Israel is and will remain an invaluable ally to the United States. And do you see it in the same way, and why?
Yes. Let's start with the second question. Of course, I think that's right, that each is an invaluable ally to the other. Of course, there is a disproportion. The United States is a country of 340 million or so, with the most powerful military on the planet, with globe-spanning capabilities. Israel is a country of around 10 million, embattled, powerful, the most powerful military in the Middle East, surrounded by enemies. That having been said, it's not just the 21st century when the United States or some people in the United States realize that Israel is a crucial ally to us. I would say that this dawned on serious students of foreign policies, specifically Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger. At a particular moment, 1970. In 1970, September 1970, Palestinians living in Jordan, led by Yasser Arafat, sought to overthrow the king of Jordan. Syria mobilized to enter on behalf of the Palestinians. The Nixon administration contacted Israel and said, we need your help. Would you be prepared to enter that conflict to prevent Syria from assisting the Palestinians in overthrowing the king? Israel said yes. Israel's conduct at that moment, by the way, in the midst of the Cold War, Syria being a Soviet ally, Israel's conduct at that crucial moment persuaded responsible realists and others that Israel actually, far from being a burden or a luxury, Israel was actually a crucial military player who could advance America's interests in the region. And so it has developed. Israel remains on the front lines of the struggle against Islamism. I don't say Islam, but I say the jihadists within the Muslim world. Israel remains a kind of stationary base, and not only Israel, but America's principal allies in the Gulf, partners in the Gulf, the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, in addition to Arab partners like Egypt and Jordan. They have no illusions. They agree with Israel that Iran is the principal threat to stability in the region. Therefore, the United States has every interest in a strong Israel that has led the battle against the Islamic Republic of Iran to the benefit not only of Israel, but also to the benefit of the Gulf Arabs. And because the Gulf is of such strategic importance to the United States, yes, because it's the source of approximately 40% of the world, it's the location of 40% of the world's proven oil reserves, and the international economy depends upon that, and we depend on the international economy. For all those reasons, yes, Israel is an important ally to the United States. That having been said, and I have to be briefer here, it remains the case that a substantial portion of Israel's munitions, the vast majority of Israel's airplanes, starting with F-35s, F-16s, F-15s, come from the United States. Israel's military operations are and have been crucially dependent upon cooperation with the United States. Of course, you can go now then the reverse direction. Israeli innovations, including, I'm delighted to mention, Israel's extraordinarily advanced technology on laser defenses, to say nothing of its air defense systems, are also of benefits to the United States. So let's say these partners are of great benefit to one another.
And what's sort of your take on the I guess the political changes in our own country?
Yes. October 7th released demons that have been bubbling to the surface in American politics for some time. I'm going to make this point quickly. This may be of special interest to the students on campus now. The eruptions of anti-Semitism we saw, beginning with October 7th, beginning with the 33 or 34 Harvard student groups who on the afternoon of October 7th issued an open letter which declared that Israel was entirely responsible for the massacres that Hamas was inflicting on it. This anti-Semitism is bound up with an anti-Americanism that has been promulgated on Americans' campuses for years, even decades. To be very brief about this will be familiar to the students. It is an orthodoxy in some places, in some Middle East politics class, maybe in many, that the United States is a settler colonialist power, the most pernicious of them. But it's got a settler colonialist outpost in the Middle East. That's Israel. So resistance to Israel, by the way, what does Hamas stand for? The Islamic Resistance Movement. Resistance to Israel is actually resistance to, at the same time, to the most pernicious settler colonialist power, that's the United States. So these ideas have gotten mixed up on our campuses. And when students go out, when they erect encampments, when they have posters that say, globalize the Intifada, who's the target of this globalization of the Intifada? Actually, the target is not Iran. The target is not the Chinese Communist Party. The target is not Vladimir Putin. The target is not Venezuela. Globalize the Intifada means the West led by the United States. So things have become much worse because anti-Semitism is now entangled with this dangerous anti-Americanism.
So, Peter, let me ask you one final question about the book, and then we'll get through a few questions in from the audience as we come up on the hour. If there is one myth or misconception about Israel, whether it's moral or political or historical, that you hope that this book would dispel, what would it be?
Oh, choosing one of so many. I guess it would be that any view that treats Israel as one-dimensional. Of course, I'd like most to dispel the delusions and vicious attacks on Israel from Israel's enemies. But I guess the argument of, if there's a sustained argument from the book, and remember, it's 40 columns written at different moments, but if there's a sustained argument, it is that we'll go back to the beginning of our conversation. Israel is a complex country that is woven together out of not one but multiple traditions, the Jewish tradition, the modern tradition of freedom, and also the modern democratic tradition. But in struggling to weave together that inheritance, I think Israel is engaged in a struggle, a noble struggle that should resonate here in the United States, because after all, the United States is not just the country that was established on the basis of Lockean principles. It's also a country that's established on the basis of classical principles derived from Rome, principles derived from the common law in England, and not least, principles derived from the West's biblical inheritance. So I suppose the final thought is, I am confident that if people come to appreciate the complexities, the multiple principles at work in Israel, they will come to a more refined admiration for what Israel has achieved and for the formidable challenges it continues to face.
Well, so Peter, let me try and get in a couple audience questions
Great.
before we break. Picking up actually on a conversation you and I were having before we started, there's a question about long-term communication strategy now that the war is over, in a sense. How should Israel correct the record, specifically about the charges of genocide, and notably at institutions like the United Nations?
Yes. So first, I want to say that the communications problem is mostly the world's fault. The world, especially some diplomats and professors and journalists in the West, have been promulgating distortions, ignorant statements, outright lies about Israel. However, that's a fact of life. This is not new. Israel stood up actually after Operation Cast Lead, a special unit within the Attorney General's office. It might have been Misrad Le'inyonim Miyuchadim, but there are many such offices, like where you worked, an office for special operations, not military, and in other arenas. I think Israel, though, nevertheless, must do better to explain to the world the international laws of war. I'll give you one example. But in the same breath, I want to also blame the United States. We should have done a better job of explaining the following. The October 7th massacres were a massive, heinous violation of the international laws of war. Hamas's conduct of the war is itself a massive violation of the laws of war. It is unlawful for combatants to dress as civilians. Hamas did that. It is unlawful to conduct military operations from inside cities. Hamas did this not least by building 400 or 500 miles of tunnels under Gaza's civilian populations. It is unlawful to use hospitals and mosques and schools and apartment buildings to store rockets and rifles and ammunition and conduct operations. It's unlawful to use your own population as human shields and to use your own civilian infrastructure as shields. It is unlawful to take civilians as hostages. We, the United States, President Biden, and I believe I would like to see more from President Trump and his team, should be making this argument, asserting these most basic points of the international laws of war every day. And as you know my opinion on this matter, Israel should do a better job of appointing as its ambassador to the United Nations a person like the young Benjamin Netanyahu in the 1980s who served as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, someone who can every day make the case on this tremendous world stage, make Israel's case, explaining the international laws of war. It's not that complicated. Explaining the complexities of Israel, explaining what we've been talking about, that Israel's engaged in a seven-front war and so on and so forth. I would like to see the Israel do more with its embassies around the world to be making the case. One final thought. So it's back to how large Israel's challenge is. A lot of misunderstandings about the challenges that Israel faces, especially in the international laws of war scene, comes from our universities, undergraduate, and our law schools. We need our universities. This was not intended as a pitch for the Alexander Hamilton Society, but in practice it is. We need them to offer courses in military history. And by the way, in the law schools as well, if for no other reason go back to an earlier point I made, to apply the international laws of war, you are commanded to balance humanitarian responsibility with military necessity. If you don't know your military history, you are in no position to make assessments of military necessity. And if you are in no position to make assessments of military necessity, you are in no position to make judgments based on the international laws of war. So Israel should do more. Here's what the United States can do to put us in a better position to understand Israel, and that means also our challenges. We can reform our universities.
Let me try and squeeze two more in, which I would say quick ones, but they're probably not going to be, but we'll do our best.
I'll be quicker. Yeah.
So the first is, what are your thoughts on the status of the Ring of Fire now? And in your view, how does this deal affect the calculus about, other Iranian proxies, both from a United States and an Israeli perspective?
I'll be brief here. I use a boxing analogy. They are down. Iran is down, but not out. They suffered heavy damage. Nuclear program, ballistic missile supply, production capabilities. Hezbollah was decapitated, and also Israel struck forcefully at their rocket and missile supply. After the fall of Assad in Syria, Israel devoted the next 48 hours to striking something like 400 targets in Syria with the purpose of eliminating their military capacity, their capacity to threaten Israel. In that sense, Israel's military situation in relation to Iran's Ring of Fire is enormously improved, down though but not out. Hezbollah has not surrendered. The Islamic Republic of Iran is not surrendered, as far as I know at least. They're not in negotiations with the United States. The jury is, at best, the jury is out on the now Sunni Islam-led Syrian state. And we can hope for the best in Gaza, but we should certainly, and I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu is at the same time preparing for the worst. And we haven't spoken about this at all, but Hamas remains a powerful force in Judea and Samaria.
So let me ask you as sort of a final question. I mean, we could go on and talk about a variety of things for a very long time, but let me try and end with this one. Should we get past the first bullet point on this Trump's plan, What in your view is sort of the most important criteria for the beginning of what he's referring to as the international stabilization force?
So this is a tough one, and I should make clear, it is my devout wish that all the points of the peace plan are implemented.
Of course.
This is aspirationally, it's terrific. Here is what is not explained. How we get to the disarming of Hamas and the demilitarization, is that going to be the task of the international stabilization force? If it is, then we've got to know, this hasn't been decided as far as the public knows, what the composition will be of the international stabilization force. Saudi soldiers, Indonesian soldiers, the president of Indonesia said he's willing to do it. Emiratis, what about Turks? On Israeli TV, former senior officials are very worried. And these are not on the right, even center left, like Giora Island, are very worried that there might be a temptation to introduce Turks. Turks are not, at this point, Erdogan is not a friend of the United States. But let's say there are no Turks. Let's say Emiratis, Saudis, Indonesians. I think the Israeli military establishment would be entitled to think as follows. This presents a puzzle for us because there's no military force in the world that is more experienced than Israel in fighting in the streets of Gaza. There's no military force in the world that has more intelligence and more military intelligence and more experience doing this. There's no military force in the world that has a stronger interest than Israel does. Isn't there a danger that introducing such a force will actually come in between Israel and its enemies in Hamas? So I would say this is, for me, this is one of the worries that I have. But I will stop with this thought. It's okay. One of my jobs, it's not listed in my job description, you didn't read this off, but is to be a worrywart. That is, I have the luxury to sit and think about what could go wrong. And every military operation, actually every political operation, should have at least some people who, even as much as they are hopeful that the operation will be conducted in accordance with the plan that has been beautifully laid out, that they will still worry about what might go wrong, because history teaches us that things have a tendency to go wrong.
Well, Peter, let me end on that very uplifting note of the things can always go wrong. But I will leave it as a cliffhanger and encourage our students who are on to invite you to their campus to continue the
Thank you.
conversation this semester, next semester. Peter, thanks for taking the time and being so generous. Congratulations on the book. Hope everybody picks up a copy and reads it, and appreciate all you do for AHS and for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the terrific questions.
Thanks, Peter. Take care. Take care, everybody.